Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Tall Timbers. Of course, Randy Zarnke is our guest this evening, and I'll talk about him in a minute. But as I do each week, if you have a phone and you haven't put it on airplane mode or silenced it, that would be awesome. And for some reason, other members of Michelle's team have this week off. But poor Randy and I are getting slave wages for this, right? Anyway, but we do have a wonderful pair of musical groups performing on Thursday at the Botanical Garden. At 6, it's Analemma, and at 7:30, Identity Crisis. So that's something to look forward to this week as part of the Tall Timber and Summer Session series. And every week I acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations on whose ancestral lands UAF and other UA campuses reside. The Trothyuta campus here is located on the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the lower Tanana River. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest. Randy Zarnke was born and raised in Wausau, Wisconsin. He participated in several team sports and loved to hunt and fish. He received his Bachelor of Science from the University of Wisconsin, LaCrosse, and a Master's and PhD from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. In 1978, he came to Fairbanks to work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And over the next 24 years, he studied wildlife diseases and parasites. Randy remains an avid hunter and fisherman, and he added trapping to that once he came to Alaska. He served as president of the Alaska Trappers Association for most of the past 20 years. He began an oral history project of trappers back in 1997, and now the project includes more than 200 interviews with hunters, pilots, trappers, guides, fishermen, and wildlife biologists. Shortly after arriving in Fairbanks, he also began playing recreational hockey, which became his favorite sport. In 2004, Randy helped form the Alaska Hockey Hall of Fame and has served as its president ever since. In 2006, he organized a community-wide celebration of the sport known as Hockey Week in Fairbanks, and we'll hear about that. So please welcome Randy Zarnke. All right.
Before we get started, I have to ask, what's the name of this series that we're part of?
Tall Timbers.
And that first word again is?
Tall.
I don't know, I just have never heard that word associated with my name before.
Yeah. Well, we thought you'd make an exception for you.
All right.
It's an old folks home.
Yeah.
They're
So,
waiting for you.
yeah, that's right. So let's talk about your youth to begin with.
Okay.
Tell me about growing up in Wausau.
Well, it was pretty much an idyllic childhood, playing baseball with my friends and swimming in the river and watching Gunsmoke with my family and camping on the weekends. It was quite nice. My parents were blue collar. We were decidedly blue collar family, but big emphasis on education from the time I was very young.
Well, we have a couple of documentary slides to share with people. Seth, would you fire up the first one for us?
Yeah.
Now,
Pretty natty.
you're
huh?
looking pretty spiffy there.
Yeah.
And then the next one, if you would advance that, I think we have your true nature. Did you
So
guys
this-
build that horse?
So this was about 1955, and my dad and his brothers and uncles and whatever were building a garage, and of course the kids wanted to be right there underfoot, but the adults shooed us away, and so they gave us something that we could do. They took one of the sawhorses, and we took a roller skate apart and made the horse, and it wasn't the strongest support, so I was the lightest of the crew, so I was chosen to be the rider. And this has been a family favorite photo ever since.
Yeah, I can see why. Now, your dad was a fireman and a fire inspector. Was he a hunter? How did you first get indoctrinated into hunting and fishing?
Yeah, my dad was a very avid hunter and fisherman. Started me from the time I was probably 5 years old fishing. And I think back on what it must have been like with me and my brother and hooks flying everywhere. And he wanted to fish, but he did what a good father should do. And he just helped us, made sure that our hooks were baited, and he took the fish off. And he was always doing whatever he could to make it better and more fun for us.
I can imagine. Do you remember your first fish?
Oh yeah, it was a bullhead, probably about that big, caught out of a gravel pit a couple miles from where we lived.
Now, on the downside, you had your older brother who apparently liked to thump on you. Is that right?
My brother is 4 years older than me. He was better at everything than I was. He was a better athlete. He was smarter. He was a very natural-born leader. So at times, I really idolized him. But his favorite pastime was picking on me. And he would poke and poke and poke and poke until I would respond and then say, "Oh, so you want to fight, huh?" And then it was a headlock and tears and all of that. And parent would come in and break it up, and he would have to go in his room and whatever, But yeah, that was an ongoing part of our relationship.
Yeah, how bad. Well, all right. But you say your parents really instilled in you a love of education. And so that must have shown itself in school. Tell me about that part of your upbringing.
I wish I knew what my parents did to inspire me that way. We could bottle it and be millionaires. It wasn't anything overt. I mean, it wasn't, "Listen, kids, sit down and study." It wasn't like that at all. They just let me know that learning wasn't a chore, learning was fun. And it isn't hard work to study your science. You're learning something while you're doing it. And that really grabbed hold with me, and it's been with me ever since, really. And another aspect of that is it was never spoken, but it was always assumed that I would just go as far in school as I could. If that was high school and, that was the best I could do, then that would be it. But it was always understood by them and by me that I would go as far as I could.
Well, given your future career in science and your dad as a fire inspector, there's problem solving involved in that. Do you think you picked up any of those traits that he probably had?
Well, I admired my dad, and I'll probably choke up if you make me talk about that too much. But yeah, he was my hero too. He was just a very solid person, not one to be flashy, but always there when you needed him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, if I copied some of his behavior, then that was a good thing.
Well, when we were exchanging emails and talking about this evening, you dropped a comment that you thought of yourself as a methodical thinker, not a creative thinker. How do you view those two things, Randy?
Yeah, you mentioned that once before, and it confused me then. I think of myself as about the least creative person in the room, maybe in this town. I can't play a musical instrument, I can't sing, I can't paint, I can't do anything like that, and wish I could, but I just never had the talent. When you mentioned the word methodical thinking, the only thing I can relate to is when there's a job to be done, if you can give me the job and I can go in the closet and lock the door and I'll just grind away till I get it done, that's kind of the way I work best. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
No, I think so, but
Um,
you were also a guy, and we'll get to these elements too, but if you think about it, how many books do you have under your belt right now?
yeah, a couple.
How many interviews have you done? And you start these programs, and I know some of them were, wouldn't it be great if somebody did this? And you do it, but think about that in that sense, Randy.
Yeah, maybe I'm not the least creative guy.
Okay, all right,
Maybe
we've
I'm in
established a perimeter.
I'm in the lower 25 percentile or so.
Now, you went to the University of Wisconsin at LaCrosse in biology and chemistry. Why those disciplines?
Well, in junior high, I had a biology instructor that was just one of these real upbeat, flamboyant almost sort of people. And, you know, he too made learning fun. And he also was one of our football coaches, so that worked together pretty well. But, you know, he really inspired me to think in the science field and, you know, especially in the biology field. So that was part of it. And then in high school, I had a chemistry professor that was, you know, not anywhere near as flamboyant, but, you know, just a very good instructor. And so I'm sure that was part of it. I remember when I went for orientation, I was thinking about majoring in chemistry, and they said, in your first 4 semesters, you'll take 5 semesters of chemistry and 4 of calculus. And I said, where do I go to change my major? It ended up that I ended up taking all that stuff anyway, but at the time it was pretty intimidating.
Well, now you said that there was one professor in college that really inspired you to go into biology. Tell me about him.
Yeah, he was relatively new, and at the time, I thought he had come up with a perfect way to motivate his students. I now realize that probably every biology professor, or bacteriology in this case, it was bacteriology, probably everybody does this, but one day we walked into class and he walked around with a rack full of test tubes and handed one to each student. And this was an unknown, and your assignment was to identify the bacteria that were in that test tube. And I've always loved puzzles. I like crossword puzzles and Sudoku and those. And at that point, I still was inspired enough by education that's what I looked at that. Here was a new puzzle. It was a biological puzzle, but nonetheless, it was a puzzle. And so over the next week or 10 days, I was able to identify that bacteria, and I figured that the world of science was where I was headed, and that was what really got me motivated.
Yeah, it sounds like. So when you go on to graduate school, you go to Madison. What drew you there? Was there a program or a prof there?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had a summer job in Madison right before I got out of undergrad, and I was able to meet the gentleman that eventually became my major professor, and he studied wildlife diseases. And so I figured, I love this bacteriology class that I just completed. I love to hunt. I love those animals. I mean, let's bring the two together. What could be better than this? And turned out to be true. And he too was a very inspirational guy. We played paddleball every morning at 7 o'clock for most of the 5 years I was in grad school. And so, you know, it wasn't just strictly instructor and student relationship. And the grad school was a totally different can of worms for me, in the sense that you don't have anybody telling you what to do anymore. It's up to you to decide what needs to be done. That was something new. It took me a couple months to adjust to that, but then off and running.
What was the state of microbiology at that point, Randy?
At the time, of course, we thought we were on the cutting edge, really. I get a couple of alumni magazines from the University of Wisconsin, and the things that they're doing now just blow me away. I remember Friday afternoon happy hours when I was a student there, and the students were complaining about they couldn't figure out this part of their project, or there was somebody else that had something they couldn't figure out. And I said, wouldn't it be neat if we had some kind of a black box that you just kind of stick your sample in and push the button and poof, it tells you? And they said, have another beer, Zarnke, that'll never happen. Well, they're way beyond that already. I mean, every issue of that magazine I read, it almost comes across as science fiction, the accomplishments that have been made in the world of biology in the last 50 years. It's just hard for me to grasp.
Now, do I have this right? You discovered a virus?
Well, I did my field work in northern Alberta. My major professor felt it was very important. You're not just a lab rat. You've got to get out in the field and collect your own samples and all of that. And he was right. And so I did my field work in northern Alberta. And for those of you that pay attention, do you recognize the oil sands, the part of northern Alberta where they found, a lot of nodding heads, and that was where I was working. And collecting samples, mostly blood samples from every little animal I could catch, squirrels and mice and whatnot. And one of them produced a virus. And I should have been thinking about this the way I did about that bacteriology class as an undergrad. That here's another puzzle. This is going to be fun. But all I could think about is all the work ahead and the drudgery and the 14-hour days, and it was just grinding away again. And my major professor made arrangements for me to work with one of the Center for Disease Control labs, and we eventually figured out what it was, and it was one of those eureka moments that we think in science they're going to happen every other day, but they happen about once a career. And it was a big sense of accomplishment and relief when we finally identified it. And it was a known virus, but it was about 2,000 miles from the nearest place that had ever been recorded before.
Wow.
So we never did figure out how that happened.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to diseases. Always happy topic to talk about in a second. But I understand we got you here in Alaska because you didn't want to be stuck with the lab and white coats. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was about a year before I finished up my PhD, I started writing letters to potential employers. I think the first round I sent out 100 letters, and I got about 8 responses, as I recall. And at the end, I ended up with 3 offers. One was in the city of Toronto, one was at the University of Notre Dame, and the other one was here. And I knew that the other 2 were going to be a white lab coat and a tie every day, and that didn't really appeal to me. And I knew that up here, once the workday was over, there was hunting and fishing to do. And so that was a real attraction. And so it didn't take me very long to make that decision. Although I have to admit, the guy at Notre Dame, I have to really give him credit, because about 3/4 of the way through the day, he told me, okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. Your first year, we can get you season tickets for basketball, hockey, baseball. We can't do football the first year, but we'll get it by the second year. So he had done his homework. He knew what was going to appeal to me. So.
But not enough.
Not enough.
Not enough. Okay. Well, what was Alaska like when you got here? Did it meet your expectations?
Well, I remember the first field trip I took, and Richard will maybe remember as I begin to describe it. We flew from Fairbanks up to Umiat, which is up on the north slope, and we were going to be doing some caribou work. and we flew from Fairbanks in a helicopter. And we didn't fly over the Brooks Range, we flew through the Brooks Range. And for a flatlander from the Midwest, wow, I mean, it was hard to imagine. It was so beautiful, I just couldn't really even grasp it. I realized in retrospect, I kept looking for some way to orient myself. It wasn't like I was thinking of these specific items, but I was looking for section lines or logging roads or power lines or something to give me some orientation. And of course, there is none of that. But then all of you that enjoy the outdoors, you know that once you get over that hump, that whole aspect of wilderness is what keeps us here. I know that it does for me. That's the most important thing that keeps me here. And so I'm glad that there are places where you don't see section lines and fence lines.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask, this will sound a little cheeky, I think, but what the heck does a microbiologist do for fish and game? The megafauna, obviously, are the more glamorous species around. So what's your life like as a microbiologist?
Well, it wasn't what I expected. And Richard is chuckling a little bit there. Richard Bishop was the regional supervisor when I was, throughout most of my career. I wasn't a very good salesman when it came down to promoting the projects that I wanted to conduct. And more than once, Richard or maybe one of the other leaders would come into my office and say, well, we're cutting up the budget right now and we're down to this project of yours, or we can do a moose survey on the Tanana Flats. And I'd say, well, you got to do the moose survey, don't you? And they go, yeah, that's what we thought. Okay, see you later. And that sounds made up, but that actually happened more than once. And I guess maybe I wasn't a good enough salesman.
You were a gentleman.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But you know, I did go out quite a bit with coworkers. Ken Witten here was one of our caribou biologists, and you know, the moose biologists and the bear biologists, and I went out with all of them on different trips. And one of the things that I was able to do that I don't think it's still the case, but I think at one time we had the largest collection of blood samples from wildlife. I think we may have had the largest collection in the world. Now that wasn't because I did all the work, it was because the bear biologists, the sheep biologists, all those guys, whenever they caught an animal to put a collar on it or for whatever other purpose, they always took blood. And so what I did with those blood samples is, I think most of you understand that when we're infected by some disease agent, our body produces antibodies against that disease agent. And so you can go and test blood samples to determine what these animals have been exposed to in the past. And because we had, you know, 2,000 bison and probably 3,000 or 4,000 caribou, we could do these huge surveys to determine what they've been exposed to. And there were times when the results would indicate that some follow-up research was necessary. That was the part that I wanted to do. But then I just told you what would happen is they'd come in and say, well, we haven't got enough money for everything, so what do you think? And
Well, we have a couple of images from your days as a biologist. Seth, would you throw up the next one? Now tell me about this.
well, let's see, the guy on the left is Harry Reynolds, who I think many of you know. And Harry was our grizzly bear biologist, but he was also an excellent shot with a dart gun. And the project we were working on there was run by a woman by the name of Audrey McGowan, who many of you might know, one of the preeminent wolverine biologists in the world. And we were up in northwestern Alaska in, I don't know, probably 75 or 100 miles north of Kotzebue at a winter camp. And that wolverine that Harry is carrying, he had just darted from a helicopter. And for those of you that have never done it, I mean, you know, wolverine is a package about that big, and flying along in a helicopter and hitting it with a dart, really hard to imagine. And he was just that good.
And then
At this point, I guess I'd like to also mention that one of the really wonderful aspects of working at Fish and Game at the time that I did was about half of our staff, they weren't just the best at what they did in Fairbanks. They weren't just the best in Alaska. They were the best in the world at what they did. And it was really an honor to work with those people. At the time, you didn't think of it that way. You just knew that one of these guys had parked in your parking spot that morning or had stolen your coffee cup or whatever it was. But you look back on it now and realize that, you know, one of the guys we worked with developed a moose census technique that I think with modifications is still being used today, you know, 40 odd years later. And those are the kind of people you really have to respect.
So Seth, if you advance one more.
Yeah, this is Audrey, the gal that I mentioned that was the lead investigator on that project.
And so I have a question about that. COVID and bird flu have kind of made us, I think, more aware about jumping species barrier. Does that happen a lot out in nature? Did you spot stuff like that?
It's both ways. There are certain disease agents that can jump from one species to another, even, you know, not at all related host species. But then there are others that are very strict. The term is species specific, that they only infect one species and don't jump to others. You know, one that can infect a lot of different animals is brucellosis. For those of you that grew up on a farm, you know about brucellosis. But, you know, there's a lot on both sides of that equation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to jump a little bit from your professional life to your passions right now. And for a guy who grew up hunting and fishing, you didn't start trapping till you got here, Randy? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it started innocently enough. You know, about a half a dozen of the people that I worked with there were trappers. And so on Monday morning, you know, I wouldn't say we were gathered around the coffee pot because that sounds like we were goofing off. And of course, state employees are all hard workers, so that would never happen. But you know, you'd hear these stories about, yeah, we caught 2 wolves this weekend, or we caught a wolverine, or we caught 14 marten, or whatever. And it just started to percolate a little bit. And then 2 of my coworkers had a trap line over on Minto Flats, and they flew over every weekend, and they invited me to go along. And I rode on the back of a sled for the whole weekend, and I was hooked. I knew that I was going to love this. And I came back, and another one of our coworkers, I was hoping he would be here tonight, John Burns. I think some of you know John. Kind of took me under his wing a little bit to be my mentor and taught me everything I know about trapping. And off I went. And here we are 45 years later, and I still love it as much as I ever did.
Seth, if you would advance, it seems like you enjoyed it pretty much the whole time. Well, I'm going to ask you, because I remember years ago when you came to KUAC and you said, you know, I've got these interviews that I've been doing. So tell me about those oral histories with trappers.
So I've been a member of the Alaska Trappers Association since about 1980, 81, 82, somewhere in there. And for the first 10 years, I was just riding along as a trapper, enjoying myself and going to the meetings and rubbing elbows with the experts and that sort of thing. And I eventually took on a couple of different roles, one of which was to line up speakers for our monthly meetings. And If you've ever had to do anything like that, you know that the first 5 or so are pretty easy, and then you stand around scratching your head a bunch trying to figure out what you're going to do for the next meeting. And one of the gentlemen, the guy that we refer to as the patriarch, his name was Dean Wilson, suggested that we bring in an old timer and just let him tell stories from back in the day. And so we did, and it was amazing to me because in a room like this during a normal one of our meetings, there'd be a conversation going on over here and another one over here and another one over here, and they weren't paying any attention. But that night when this old timer started telling stories, it was just dead silent. And I went, we might be onto something here. These guys like this. And so for a couple of years, we did just 1 or 2 or 3 a year. And then it kind of occurred to me at some point, sitting at my desk at Fish and Game, I know it doesn't happen to anybody else, but occasionally my mind would wander. And it didn't wander to the Packer game or whatever. It wandered to, who am I going to interview next? What communities should I go to? Is my equipment all in order and all that? And after a few months of that, I said to myself, I said, hey, there's a message here. I mean, this is where my heart really is. And so I retired when I did primarily to pursue that oral history project. And so for about 10 years, I was recording 10, 12, 15 interviews a year. We're now up over 200 from something like 75 different communities here in the state. I know you've heard me say this, others have heard me say it. I think it's the most important thing I've done. Hunting and trapping and all of that is very important to me. And 100 years from now, I think those recordings will allow people to learn what life was like in the first half of the 1900s for people that live that kind of a lifestyle. I hope that's the role that it serves.
You know, Randy, for people who don't do this, it's not as easy as it looks. You have to know, you have to research who you're interviewing, and then you have to make them feel comfortable, all the while either holding a microphone right in front of them or pinning something on them. How did you get into that process?
I guess I would say I just kind of grew into it. I wasn't as good as you ever, but I certainly didn't start out polished, but you just learn certain tricks as you go. I still remember one gentleman that I interviewed up in Fort Yukon, one of the best trappers in the state. His name was Fred Thomas. And for about the first 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, so Fred, I imagine you've taken a few moose. Yup. Any big ones? Yup. Could you tell us about one of them? Well, okay. But I don't know what button it was anymore, but eventually you hit the right button, and then he started to open up. And I can honestly say, I think I've done 203 of these now. I kind of lost exact track, but with one exception, I walk out of every one of those interviews with a big smile on my face saying, I can't believe I just spent 2 hours listening to all those great stories. And it was from people all the way. One gentleman had owned a multi-million-dollar helicopter company down in Ketchikan. But when you asked him about his favorite memories, he remembered when he was 19 years old and he and a buddy went out of Ketchikan, found a down cedar tree, made shakes out of it, built this little hovel, and spent all winter trapping mink. And that was by far his favorite memory. And on the other end of the spectrum, there was a guy out of McGrath that didn't have a lot of worldly possessions, but he somehow knew that he was living the lifestyle that so many of us dream about. We don't have the guts to pursue it the way he does, to the exclusion of making a dollar. And in his mind, it was a good trade. He was happy with his life, even though he didn't have hardly any money. So those are the things that really kept me enthused about that project.
Well, and also, you don't know what the acoustic environment's going to be
Oh,
like
no,
when
yeah.
you go there. And so it could be very noisy, or it could be,
Telephones ringing, dogs barking, doors slamming, all of that. And you shudder when you're the guy that's recording. But I remember talking to you and some of the other people all those many years ago, and I said, but listen to the content. Maybe the recording isn't perfect, but listen to the content. And I still feel that way.
yeah. Well, I'm going to transition to another passion of yours, hockey. But we were talking before we started this evening, and it occurs to me you picked two passions that couldn't be further apart in certain respects. Trapping, I think, is a very solitary, meditative kind of, especially going out along the trap line. And hockey seems to be like anything but meditative, if those games I've seen are any indication.
Well, I certainly agree with you about the lonely aspect of the trap line. I do my trap line on snowshoes, and so I am plodding along step by step by step, and I enjoy that physical part of it. But yeah, if you need time to think through anything, you've got time on the trap line, and you go through everything from A to Z during that period of time. I think the reason that I was attracted to both of those activities was the physical nature of it.
Huh.
I enjoyed the hard work. I still enjoy the hard work of the trap line. And hockey, obviously, is a very physically demanding sport. There's two gentlemen in the back row here that were excellent players on the Gold Kings, and they know what I'm talking about there.
Well, but here, let me kind of take it a step farther in the sense that when you're on the trap line, you have to scan around and see what's happening and that analytical skill you talk about. But in hockey, it's like split second, and it's pure adrenaline and instinct, I would think.
Yeah, and that's why I was really never very good at it. You're right about that. I mean, some sports you can plan exactly when and where and how things are going to happen. That ain't hockey. Things just happen instantaneously, and as you say, you just have to respond.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the first team you were a part of?
There was a team sponsored by what's now Shoppers Forum Mall, and we were the Shoppers Forum Merchants.
Seth, would you advance? All right, tell me about this team.
This is a later team. Now, as president of the Fairbanks Hockey Hall of Fame, we have a few dollars and we can buy jerseys and sponsor our own team. And I'm kind of looking off to the side here, but one guy in particular that you'll recognize, I'm sure, there in the front row right next to me is John Binkley. And John plays the game just like he's there. He's got a smile on his face the whole time. Those of you that know the Binkley family, I think they're born smiling and they die smiling. The other guys, gosh, I don't know. Ted Swem is in the back row on the far right, wildlife biologist here in town. And Mike Kuntz was our goalie there in the red and white. He was an archaeologist for BLM, I believe. This was not that long ago, probably 8-9 years ago. This was one of we now play in the Old Timers League.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you would advance one more, this is a slightly larger crowd. And is that the Stanley Cup there?
That's it. And you mentioned earlier that one of the things I have created, see here, well, I guess I have created, is Hockey Week in Fairbanks. It's a 10-day celebration of the sport. We have about 25 different activities during Hockey Week. And, we have some of the same things every year, and every year and every year. We do a blood drive and those sorts of things. But I always try and bring in something special too, something unique. And I got to know the guys at the real Hall of Fame in Toronto, and I began asking them if they could bring the Stanley Cup to Fairbanks. And they kind of patted me on the head and said, yeah, we'll see. We'll call next year. And so I just kept calling and calling and calling, and in 2011 it worked out. And the cup was going to be in Whitehorse for some special event over there. And thanks to Bob Hajdukovic, who I think many of you know, and he owned, was it called Raven Air? Mm-hmm. He agreed to fly it over, and I still remember sitting with Bob on the tarmac when that plane came around the corner, and I had goosebumps.
Yeah.
And we had the Stanley Cup here for about 30 hours. And we had it over at the Big Dipper where this picture was taken, and people were lined up essentially around that whole building. And it was a very rewarding experience.
Oh, you think?
There are times when you wonder whether your actions are appreciated, but there was no wondering that year. I mean, it was pretty clear that the community really appreciated the fact that the Stanley Cup was in Fairbanks.
We're going to look at, Seth, if you advance. Now this, I don't remember seeing any images of this one before. Tell me what that is, Randy.
So that was, if you look down at the bottom, that was 1980-81. That was the first year I played. And I was selected at the end of the season. I started the season as the worst player in the league. And at the end of the season, I was selected as the most improved player. Probably still the worst player in the league. So it tells you how bad I was. But that was the first year, and here we are, 45 years later, and I've gotten rid of essentially all of those little trophies, but that one I'll always have that.
Well, it's got a moose on it, for heaven's sakes. I mean, when's the last time you saw a trophy with a moose on it? Okay, and as we're moving forward, I want to go back to something you said about, as a biologist, not being able to get the funding to pursue those kind of research projects you wanted. And Seth, if you would advance. Here is something you continue to invest in. Tell me about this picture.
This will be a little bit harder. About 10 years ago, I sat down to rewrite my will. And I decided to want to give a little bit to the Hockey Hall of Fame and a little bit to the Trappers Association, a little bit here and there. But I decided that most of my assets I wanted to use to support wildlife research in Alaska. And once I'd made that decision, I dithered and dithered a little bit, those of you that know me know I just had to have every last detail in place. Does that sound about right? And at one point, the lady in the front row, Mary Bishop, said, I don't know if this was an exact quote, but it was something like, "Oh, cripes, Randy, just do it." And so I was lucky enough. There was a young gal that was just graduating from here at UAF and was going to be starting a graduate program in Idaho where she would study the population genetics of wolverines. And it just meshed so well with what I wanted to support. And it's worked out really well. She just got her PhD here about 6 months ago, and since then I've supported 3 other projects as well, and all of those led to degrees. And I can't tell you how good it feels to help support those sorts of things. And I tell people that as good as I feel for the little bit of money that I donate, I can't imagine how good Bill Gates feels when he gives away $1 billion.
Boy, I'd like to feel that though,
Oh.
wouldn't you?
That'd be pretty nice.
Yeah.
But this has been, well, I guess I said earlier that the oral history project was the most important thing I did, but this one might be 1B. You know, I think this is,
Maybe a tie, huh?
feel pretty proud of it. And you can see a couple of the people, the bishops and the feelings over here. I wanted them to be there because it was a proud day for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, this underscores just the importance of research and knowing what's going on out there and being prepared so you can plan, either as a game manager or a biologist. Do you want to reflect at all about the importance of that kind of research?
Yeah, well, when I started at Fish and Game, I had heard the terms basic research and applied research, and I probably could have given you a textbook definition of them. But working at Fish and Game, you learned that there isn't a lot of extra money laying around to fund what we would call basic research, counting how many times a butterfly flaps its wings per minute, or you know, what direction a muskrat faces when it's eating its food. You know, that's interesting, I guess, but we only had enough money to support the things that would determine how the population of animals, whether these were moose or caribou or sheep or whatever, that the research was applied. In other words, you had to do something that would help the managers manage that population more effectively. I don't know, am I answering your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and that's the kind of research that I want to support going forward.
Yeah. Well, something else that's a continuing passion, it's kind of, talked a little bit about the publications that the Trappers Association. Seth, if you would forward one more. I think this Courier book is probably your most popular title at the Trappers Association.
Oh, that's not true, but go ahead.
Okay. What's the most popular?
Well, I was hoping he was going to be here tonight. He promised me he would. Some of you watch Mountain Men on TV, and there's a guy by the name of Marty Maiorado who is one of the stars of that TV program, and he wrote a book called In the Land of Wilderness, and his is the biggest seller.
Wow. But this does okay.
This does okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So the story behind this book, Fred Courier came to Alaska in 1894 to look for gold. He spent 10 years here. 2 of the years, let me tell you about just basically the book. The level of adventure is right up there with anything you've read. But what puts it over the top is he was an excellent writer. There's a guy in the back row who's smiling right now because I gave him a copy just when he went on his moose hunt back about 10 years ago. When he came back, he was mad at me. I asked him why, and he said, I thought that book was going to last me the whole hunt. He says, I finished it in the first day. So, anyway, Courier spent 2 years on the Upper Chena, and he named the creek that they mined on, and through a series of almost improbable, if not impossible events, we got some pictures of their mining camp, and one of them shows the camp in a very unique setting. And Marty Maiorado, who I just mentioned, and I have said for about 5 years, this summer we're going to go up there and we're going to find it. Well, last summer we went up and we found it. And for those of you that have ever done anything like that, it's about as exciting as it gets. Marty said to me after about a half an hour, he said, I didn't know you could dance.
See, you're creative.
So, you know, so here's a mining camp from 125 years ago, and we went up there last summer and found their cabins, and 2 weeks from today, we will be going up with Josh Reuther from up at the University Museum a trained archaeologist, and we will be investigating the site. And when I first encountered that Courier manuscript, there was a guy that used to work here at the university. His name is Dirk Tordoff. Some of you know him. He ran the film archives for many years. And he was cleaning out his office, and this goes in this pile, and this goes in this pile, and he looked at this, and he handed it to me. I said, "What's this?" He said, "It's a book manuscript. You'll like it. Just get it out of here." And so that night, I read the first 10 pages and went, "Holy cow. I mean, this is so good." And I do this routinely. This is so good that I have to figure out a way to share it, because I know that everybody else is going to love it too. And so we got that book published. And then that led to, I mentioned earlier, how some photos came to, a guy contacted me, he said, "I've read the book." He said, "My great-grandfather was a member of that party." He said, "I've got about 100 photographs. Would you like to see them?" And one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And here we are 10 years later, and we're still finding things out. And it's just been really exciting, and something that I certainly never saw coming. I certainly wasn't prepared for, but boy, it sure has been fun.
Yeah, and it's no small task to publish a book.
Oh no, we're really lucky in the Trappers Association. We've started out with my book, which is based on that oral history project that came out in 2013. And ever since then, about once a year or so, not exactly on that schedule, but I'll get a call and somebody will say, "I've been scribbling a bunch of stories down from, my past, and I don't know where to go from here, and I know that you've done a couple books, could you help me out?" And I always tell them, "Yeah, I can." And because that first book of mine, we had published through a guy down in Anchorage, and he would call me every couple of weeks and say, "Okay, now do this." And I would say, "How much is that going to cost? How long is that going to take? Why is it important? Is it going to increase?" And all those sorts of questions he would very patiently answer, and I'd do what he told me. 2 weeks later, he'd call me and say, "All right, now do this." And I'd say, "How much is that going to cost? How long is that going to take?" And so, if nothing else, when these new people, these new authors come to me, I can save them all that, because this guy we can trust him, and he treats us right. And so we now have 8 books in our collection, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend any one of them to anybody. They're all that good. And we got started in this thinking the Trappers Association, we would make some money. Well, unless you're Stephen King or somebody of that stature, yeah, you can make a few dollars selling books, but it's really not going to get rich. But what it's done is it's elevated the profile of our organization across the country. When I go to meetings outside, people know about our book collection, and they say, "When's your next one coming out?" Because I got them all, and I know how good they are, and I'm going to get the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So it's worked out really good that way.
Yeah, and you have a pretty engaging website, and that's the digital age for trappers, right?
Yeah. The guy sitting in the back is the one that's responsible for that. Our editor, Justin Maple, he's really brought us a long ways.
Well, about this time every evening that we do these things, we open it up to memories, reflections, or questions. You ready to field the field?
I'm ready.
Okay. Does anybody have a question or insight they want to share with Randy?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that when you drive around the town, or especially you drive past the Big Dipper, you see a big sign up there that flashes, that has the current event that's going on or whatever. Randy is responsible for that. He's responsible. What?
I just whispered to him, I forgot about that.
Yeah. This is the non-creative.
So yeah, for a non-creative guy, but he's responsible for that. A lot of the things that are going on in the outdoors, he's sort of spurred those on. And I have to just say that this last book, when you talk about trapping and the spirit, of trapping and everything. The last one that was written by a trapper who didn't want to be identified, printed anonymously, but now we know who that individual is because he just died this last year and the troopers found him at his cabin. And this was a professional, this was a doctor who flew in every year to trap. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a very, very good book because it really, you know, sort of brings out the essence of being in the outdoors and what's going on out there. And so that's another, so Randy and Justin, they're responsible for that.
Do you want to talk about that title at all? There's another book that...
I think I gave you a copy of that.
Yep.
It's called Alaska Wilderness, A Soul's Journey. And it was one of these where the guy came to me and said, I've been scribbling a few things down and I'm a real deep thinker, I'm into religion, I'm into philosophy, you may not like it. And the first 10 pages were, holy cow, he wasn't kidding. But then I will share one story, I hope that this won't spoil it for those of you that buy it, but this gentleman also ran his trap line on snowshoes, yay for snowshoes. And one time he was walking along in the setting sun, plodding along step after step, and he looked up and at the back of the room, 30 yards away, there was a wolf in his trail. And they stared at each other for a minute or so, and the wolf wandered off. And he went, that was pretty cool. How many? And then there was another one. And they stared at each other for a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and it wandered off. And another one, and another one. 18 wolves crossed his trail. I said, I think this one is a keeper. So.
Well, you know, being the focal, the other part that Wendy was talking about is you seem to be at the nexus of, I mean, with hockey or with trapping or publishing or these oral histories. Do you ever say no when somebody comes up there and say, oh, I got a project for you?
Well, one of the things you hear when you retire is you have to learn how to say no. And my response to that is, but I'm the one that comes up with these ideas. How do you say no to yourself? This doesn't seem to work. So that hasn't been my forte of saying no.
Yeah, it makes retirement pretty lively, I'd imagine.
Not too many years ago, I recall you went to Italy, to Fanano, where Felix Pedro or the Felice Pedroni was. And what was your take on that?
So for people who may not have heard that, you went to Italy and to the hometown of Felix Pedro.
Yeah, so 15 years ago, Fanano, Italy, and Fairbanks, Alaska are sister cities. Fanano is the birthplace of Felix Pedro. And 15 years ago, Fanano sent a contingent here to visit Fairbanks. And the mayor is a hockey guy. And so I got a call and they said, can you take him down and show him the Hall of Fame and introduce him around? And that, hell, yeah, sure, I can do that. That's easy. And a couple of years later, we got an invitation from Fanano. We want you to bring a hockey team over here and play against us. Well, are we talking kids or whatever? And they said, no, an adult team. And so, thanks to a few of the guys that were in that picture earlier, we took a team over to Fanano, and you just happened to be there on a different sort of a trip, but we crossed paths, and it was probably the best trip of my life. They just treated us like absolute kings. And if you've been to northern Italy, you know what a beautiful place it is. And the reputation for good food and good wine is well deserved. And we won the hockey game, although that was pretty much immaterial at that point. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Anyone else?
I would just like to say, from the hockey's perspective, Without Mr. Zarnke, there wouldn't be a Fairbanks Hockey Hall of Fame, period. I played hockey for a lot of years, very proud of what he's done. My son's played hockey, had a scholarship at UAA. He's in the college hockey honor roll and up in the Fairbanks Hockey Hall of Fame. My grandson's playing hockey now, and what you've done for the sport is not a non-player, kind of player, to come in and spend all the time and work with the borough and work with a lot of people. You just don't go in and say, yeah, I want half of the Big Dipper, here's my idea, and just do it, you know? And to politic on that end and have the patience and the intelligence to work with other people, you know, to bring it into a public facility like that is unbelievable. Thank you.
So,
Thanks, Sean.
yeah, hockey. But here's something, you write article, you for years had a column. So tell me about that. I mean, that.
Well, when we do Hockey Week, one of the events during Hockey Week is the annual induction ceremony for the Hall of Fame. And we recognize a coach, an on-ice official, any local kids who played college hockey, and then our inductee. So we're honoring people in 4 different categories. And I've always felt that articles should be written about those people, that should appear in the News Miner and now social media as well. And especially given the way the News Miner has changed over recent years, if you want that done, you better write them yourself. So that's what I've done for all these years. And actually, I enjoy it. I get to connect with people that I've known for years and say hi to in the grocery store, and now I get to learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah, they always have great stories to share.
That's right.
Yeah.
I have one thing I'd like to say before we quit, and I hope Michelle, if you're back there, step in here. So, this program is called Tall Timbers, and prior to this, she did a series she called
Down Memory Lane.
Down Memory Lane, where she brought members of the faculty in. And we talked before we started tonight, and about 10 years this has been going on. And I think it's just been a tremendous service to the community. In those 10 years, I think I maybe have missed 10, like one a year. I'm your best customer.
I know.
And I just really want to thank you for not just because I'm up here tonight, of course, but I think I just really enjoy it, and it's a wonderful service to the community.
Thank you.
So thank you.
And before I'm done, Robert talked about how hard it is to be sitting in that seat and do a good job, and I think you all know what a good job he does.
I'll pay you after we're done. Okay. Hey, and we have cake and ice cream, so it just gets better. So once again, Randy Zarnke.